Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of All Things Family Enrichment. I am Tim Rolfe, the Family Advocacy Program Manager here at Redstone Arsenal. And this month is October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And with me today is our domestic violence victim advocate, Jeronica Frierson, and our new parent support person, Mackall. And we are really excited to bring you this edition because we want to talk about some things that are trending and things that we see that are important in the realm of domestic violence and within our practice and some of the research that we may be looking at. And recently, Jeronica wrote an article and we posted it in the Redstone Rocket and went out in this last iteration. And one of the things I wanted to talk about first and foremost is this issue of, it talks about domestic violence. Nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, this equates to approximately 10 million individuals. So the frequency in which domestic violence occurs, and of course this just mentions physical violence, but we know that domestic violence, like we've covered in other episodes, is domestic violence is a very broad topic. But talk to us about the prevalence of domestic violence and how frequently is this really occurring throughout our homes in America?
According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we are looking at 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men who have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. On a typical day, domestic violence hotlines receive approximately 19,000 calls. Wow. So that's basically 13 calls every minute. Okay. So in 2018, a little dated, and I think if we take into even account COVID, 20% domestic violence accounted for 20% of all violent crime. So, when you think about it, in a room full of people, right, the likelihood that someone has experienced it is greater than not.
Right.
Okay. And that's both men and women.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times people do not think of men as traditionally domestic violence victims.
Absolutely.
And, we're entering into, an age now where we're understanding that it does happen more frequently than not.
Yes.
But it goes underreported, right?
Yes,
'Cause,
absolutely.
men are not likely to report any domestic violence that they may be incurring.
Absolutely.
And I've read an article, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's correct, where that men typically abuse more physically, where women tend to abuse more mentally and emotionally. Would you say that's correct in your experiences?
So I would say I've been an advocate for 9 years, social worker for almost 15 years. So that is on par with typically, what we see. I think what we've had to come to grips with is that, there's this assumption that if you can physically overpower someone in some way, that's the only way to control them. And that's just simply not the truth. Once you or someone has gotten, in your head, right, that is where the issues start, right? If I am in a situation, if I am in a unhealthy relationship and there's this dynamic where I question my value as a person, I question my worth, I've lost my self-esteem, I've lost my connectedness, you may have never put your hands on me physically, right? But the impact of that psychological and emotional abuse is real, and it impacts how I show up in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about one specific form of domestic violence, and that's that of strangulation, right?
Yes.
We know that non-fatal strangulation is let's say it ups the ante, right?
It does.
We know that those are much more serious cases.
Yes.
Because the reality is it takes very, very little pressure to cause a fatal result, right? And that if you've come to a point where you've actually passed out, then how close is the victim to death, right?
Yes.
And the seriousness of that. And I think victims sometimes may look at that, or the general population may consider that as, well, just another form of violence, where strangulation is a really unique form of violence.
It is.
That is super, super dangerous, correct?
Absolutely. Typically, and I will say that not only, have I heard this from the people that I've worked with, but I've also even seen this perpetuated on, whether it's social media or on television, and it's, an idea, well, they didn't hit you, but just kind of, lack of a better way, they, choked you out or something like that, right? And no, you have to think about it. Like, your ability to breathe is being restricted. And in that moment, there is nothing, that very little between the person that is doing that, your offender, right? What gauge are they using to determine that it's too much, right? Or we've crossed that threshold of, basically looking at it being nearly fatal. Beyond that fact, so, let's say it was not fatal. We do know that there are residual side effects that last following a strangulation incident, right?
Right. And like, I think about, because batterers, right? They know, right, that if they punch someone in the eye or they give them a fat lip, and that person is out in the workforce the next day, then a lot of questions are going to be raised, right?
Right.
But isn't it true, especially with people who are intentionally trying to, abuse, control, batter, that they look for ways of harming their victims that aren't so visibly obvious, and the challenges with that, with law enforcement response and things of that nature. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Right. So a lot of times, there's definitely, I believe, a thought process or a form of maliciousness that goes into how DV, particularly physical violence, is actually executed, right? So a lot of people will be very cognizant of, not hitting you somewhere that will be very obvious to the naked eye. When you look at something like strangulation, right, what can you do? That's easier to cover. It's not that area won't bruise, but it's easier to conceal without it appearing a bit off, versus the arms or, the face area. But it's also one of the most lethal, right? Right up there with weapons, right? Utilizing a weapon. Yeah. And so I think it's important, to recognize that if that has occurred, that ups the ante.
Absolutely.
In terms of danger.
It's almost like somebody pointing a gun at them, or threatening to turn the car into traffic while driving, right?
Yes.
I mean, it can be that dangerous.
Absolutely.
And I think the response, obviously, has got to be one, especially when we're talking about military command interventions and law enforcement. First responders, we need to be educated on those things and how lethal those types of things do. And I know in your work, you do lethality assessments, correct? Yeah. And so you kind of do an assessment of, where is this lethality on a scale?
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And base your responses accordingly. One of the unique things, and I know this may get talked about a lot, but I think it's extremely important when we talk about domestic violence, is the cycle that couples go through. And the fact that, when couples go through a situation and it's kind of like they go through the violent piece, then they have this honeymoon phase, and then things start heating up again, and then they're back at a violent situation. And what I find unique in that dynamic is that not only do we know that the victims don't leave the first time, right? Most times it takes multiple times for things to occur for a victim to finally resolve to leaving the relationship due to various different reasons, very complex issues beyond people's general awareness of why victims return and stay in relationships. But also, Jeronica, the dynamic where support services and family supports and friendships that kind of pull away from the victim victim saying, well, you're silly for going back to that
Right.
relationship. And
Right.
that adds to the challenge of the whole dynamic,
Yes.
does it not?
It absolutely does. I remember when I first started working as an advocate back in 2013, my impression of what I would be doing and what I actually do is very different, right? And so
Interesting.
one of the things that I thought was that, okay, you're going to come in, I'm going to get you connected with resources, the wraparound services, what social workers like to call
Yes.
it, right? Get you these wraparound services, and you will be able to go on and live your life the way it's meant to be lived, right? Only to get humbled real quick about what the barriers were. So even before talking about barriers, having to understand and acknowledge the fact that a person is at their most unsafe when they're trying to leave a relationship.
Right.
When
That's the critical point, right?
That's a very,
where
very
safety is the
critical point where,
Yep.
it can be very, very volatile and very, very dangerous, right? And so beyond that,
because the batter is losing control,
because
right?
the batter is losing control,
he
right?
or she is losing
And
control of that situation.
how dare you, right? How dare you make this decision for yourself, override, me or whatnot. Okay, so you don't leave right away, but that it takes about 7 times. That's real, because I think what I want people to understand is that it's not just leaving. So you have the regular stuff. How do I secure shelter? How do I secure funding for shelter? Because you cannot stay in a domestic violence shelter forever, right? What about our children? So, one way that batterers, are able to still have impact or influence over a victim is through children, right? And utilizing, children. What if you haven't been in the workforce in, 3 years or 5 years? For our military folk, what if you have been committed to your partner and embracing their career, meaning when they move, you move, right? No questions asked. So you may have forfeited some things that you could have done to grow.
In support of the soldier.
In support, right? Yeah. In support of that soldier. Yeah. And now all of a sudden you are wanting to leave, but you are absolutely overwhelmed with the fact that what are my resources, right? And everyone can help with something, but not all. You're having to go back. And there have been many a times where I've had to say to someone, the best thing you can do is right in this moment is create a strategy, right? Because we know what it's like if you've ever been displaced, whether it's power go out because of a thunderstorm or, something happens and you've been displaced, right? How do we behave? Even when we know that there's an end in sight, right? Insurance is going to come through. Huntsville Utilities is going to come through, right? There's an end in sight. But imagine being displaced and no end in sight. And you don't know what you're going to do. And you got a couple little ones or big ones, who are looking to you to figure it out. Yeah. And you're still in danger.
And that's why I'm really glad that the Army does provide services like yours, right? For victims, to have a victim advocate to come alongside, because I think, that dynamic of people wondering why you're staying in a relationship, or, well, if you go back to that, I hear a lot of times, if you go back to that relationship, you deserve what you get, right?
Yeah.
And they couldn't even begin to fathom the reasoning why a victim would return to their abuser.
Absolutely.
And there's so many intricate details as far as, what am I going to do with my children? How am I going to care for myself? Where are we going to go? Especially like you're saying, because a lot of times it's intentional, right?
Yes.
Like the batterer will intentionally isolate and prevent them from accessing work job skills and those independent things that we know that are important to every individual. But it's intentional, right?
Absolutely.
And they create that environment where they're preventing them from escaping if they ever were to try.
Absolutely.
Because it's intentional in that design a lot of times.
Yeah. We really minimize, and I think, can be insensitive to what it really means to lose everything, and for a lot of people, leaving an abusive relationship means that in order to save your life, that you let everything go. Imagine, think about, individuals who just get divorced and they talk about how their lifestyle changed, their social circle changed, right? And how isolating that can be. So think about people who are victims who are leaving relationships, right? They are basically a lot of times having to forfeit so much, even within their families. How many times have we heard, family members or friends, saying, well, it's not that bad, or she just has a stressful job, or he just has a stressful job, or still very much so a good man or a good woman, right? So
well, he's providing for them,
right?
So,
a good provider, so stick it out, things will get better, will they?
Yeah.
And sometimes your own family and friends, because what their belief system is around it, they're not able to or willing to support you. Yeah. So, you kind of going out there, you going out on a limb.
Yeah. I used to, when I worked at Department of Human Resources and I did child abuse investigations, a lot of times it would be a domestic violence type situation, and we were concerned for the children's safety. And what I noticed was that there was a lot of services and wraparound support for victims, right? Which is great because we need that. But what we saw a lack in was interventions for the person doing the abusing.
Yes.
And I always wondered why there was a gap in service there, because it's almost as if maybe it's a mentality, right? That, well, they don't deserve help because they were abusing somebody,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Well, why were they abusing somebody? Did they have history? What was their upbringing? I've always wondered why there was a lack of support for batterers. I'm thankful that here in Huntsville we have several services that we can refer batterers to regarding domestic violence classes and training, anger management type courses, which is truly one of the greatest needs, because that's the crux of the problem, right, within the relationship. And if we can fix that, then we've restored the family ultimately.
A lot of people will say, do I believe that people can change, right, in the context of being an abuser? And so I always say I struggle with the question, but I do wholeheartedly believe that one can, if you're willing to be accountable. So if you are willing to embrace a batterer's intervention class, right? Like, let's not dress it up. Let's call it what it is. You know what I mean? It is a batterer's intervention class, right? You are an abuser. You have acted as an abuser. If the legal system is involved, offender, batterer, whichever, right? But you got to own it. You have to own it. And it can't be, I would not have done this if the other person didn't do X, Y, and Z, right? So you
justifying
take,
your actions,
right? Like there's we don't justify actions, right? We cannot justify violence. We all have these lived experiences. And so even when you have lived experiences, whether it's trauma or whatnot, no, it was not your fault, right? That it happened to you, that you experienced that, but it is your responsibility to address it in a way that it doesn't bleed into your relationships.
Yeah. And I find it interesting because a lot of times, we talk about, well, if you grew up in an abusive home as children, and Maria, you could probably speak to this, where they witness violence, but sometimes children come out of that and learn what not to do.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Just because you've grown up in an environment where there's domestic violence in the home does not mean automatically, right, that you're going to be an abuser when you grow up.
Yeah, that's correct.
You could totally take that in and learn what not to do. And even though you didn't have great parenting demonstrated, you still are learning very important lessons, right?
Yes, that's very true.
I think it's really an interesting dynamic, especially when you add children involved into the equation and all of the challenge that come with that. What else is trending in the domestic violence world right now?
I think that, I don't know if I would say that it's trending, but we talked about, minimization. We talk about what I've seen a lot, and don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of social media, very much so, but we have to be careful about glorifying certain types of things on social media. And so being mindful of what types of messages that we're putting out there as it pertains to domestic violence and what it doesn't or doesn't look like. And something that we see a lot is like this, that's the justification. And so being very mindful of what are you taking in? Like, I want everybody to be willing to think about what's my perspective on it. It's, you really can't straddle the fence. I think it's very important that even within your own circle that you are willing to make it clear that this is not something that we support. And while you may not support it, like, what's your backup to that? Is that, saying, are you a safe space for someone? Are you willing to have the hard conversations? I know everyone, depending on where you stand, I've heard people say, if I hear Me Too again, I'm going to scream. But if we think about it in that context, like, listen, people are going through things, and they have gone through things, and they don't have to obligate themselves to be quiet about it. So you know what? Maybe that's the trend, is that people are not obligating themselves as much to be quiet about it. But let's take that next step. Like, let's try to get help and or be of help, be of assistance.
And you bring up a really interesting topic that I do want to touch on, and that is that of technology and how that has changed the landscape as to how people can control and abuse and stalk. Is stalking domestic violence?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Because we have Life 360 on our phone, right? And my wife can, find my location whenever she wants. And I'm okay with that. But am I being stalked?
Right. So no, right? So
I just want to clarify.
All right. And so, I will be the first one to say, unfortunately, it's my sister that's still my emergency contact. So she has my location. And so, it's kind of annoying when she's like, hey, why are you still blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, girl, so no, there is no threat to my safety, right? There's no threat to your safety, whether physically or emotionally, if you turn off that Life 360.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I was going to get ready to say, like,
depends on how my wife reacts to that, right?
Right. It's just, but it's right. Like, you have a voice, so she might not like it, but you have a voice. We can talk about it, right? It's a safe space for you to go and say, I was thinking about whatever reason you would want to come up with to turn it off, but it's there's this space. But on the flip side of it is, your opinion doesn't matter, right? Like, it's not a choice. Like, you carry the phone, but it doesn't belong to you, right? Your time doesn't belong to you. Your space doesn't belong to you. Your body doesn't belong to you.
Right.
That's when we get problematic.
That's when it crosses the line.
That's when it crosses that line.
Because with my family, we have Life 360, and we have my wife, my daughter on it, and then me, and we all know where each other's location is.
Yes.
And we do that primarily for safety, right?
Yes.
If my wife's in a car accident, I want to know.
Yes.
And it gives car accident alert. But again, I think with technology, it has become so much more easier and prevalent to stalk and track and, social media accounts that batterers can use to locate and find information out and access and things. It's become a lot more challenging, hasn't it, to try to keep people safe and off the radar, if you will, in today's world.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we're kind of in a space now where we really all just need to be intentional about how we utilize social media, even to the tune of maybe how it's not safe to update in real time. So no, I know you're super excited about your vacation. I'm super excited about any vacation I might get. 700 people on my friend list don't need to know that I am not at my home right now. Yeah. And so I think we all could learn, do you know what your privacy settings are? Whether it's on your phone, I have an iPhone by default, but I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed at how many prompts I get, going places. Yeah. And it's like Home Depot does not need to know what my location is.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Whatever restaurant I'm going to, why? Like, just give me the address. And, because remember, it's not just that single thing, you're opening yourself up. And so whether we're looking at needing to protect our privacy because we're trying to get out of a dangerous relationship, or just generally good security measures, I think we all could stand to just be a lot more aware, not paranoid, but just a lot more aware of how sharing on the internet can be used against you.
Sure. And I think about teens, right? For example, you do teen safe dating and things like that, and some of our teen safe dating initiatives, and the fact that just one click of a button and a teen could really cause some damage.
Yes, absolutely.
And the awareness. So, what do you talk about with your interventions with families and talking about healthy online activities and things of that nature?
Things don't ever go away. Things do not ever go away for real. Particularly with teens and kids, youth, young people, creating an awareness and a responsibility for what you do and how that impacts other people, because that really does kind of segue, right? The intersection of bullying in some ways when you're making a decision about sending something out there and who it could affect, why it could affect. I think our culture is viral and sensational crazy at this point, right? Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going viral. We got to ask if that's really a good thing. Right?
Is going viral a good thing?
Is going viral a good thing? And like, for what? And I think we don't really put enough effort into thinking about or considering what the consequences could be. So, to young people, just remembering that there are consequences. It doesn't go away. To be mindful of the impact, whether for yourself or, if it's against someone else. Just know that, I'll call myself out, right? Like, people share, okay? I'm going to just say it. I'm embarrassed the number of screenshots I have in my phone. Because I want to be real. I want to be, I'm going to be straight up. Like, I am just embarrassed, like the number of screenshots, right? And so, and I say that, and I have enough of my own business to mind. But, but think about it, right? So like when you send something to someone or you put something on the internet, okay, it's not just confined to your followers list, okay? And I'm telling you, like, all your followers are not loyal. Right. So
some of them are just being nosy, right?
Some of them are just being nosy or whatever. And I may or may not be that person sometimes. But I think, like, once again, think about what you're putting out there. Yep. Think about how you're representing yourself, not even how you're representing your family, but how are you representing, yourself?
Right. I think those are really important conversations to have when we talk about, when we're intervening on the behalf of a victim of domestic violence or teens who are entering, the dating scene, that those are just really important conversations that has really changed our lives forever, because like you said, it is a forever image. And,
it is.
And people could do all sorts of things with them.
And
absolutely.
They are doing
and they are
scary
doing
things.
Yeah.
Even with young infants and taking names and using them for alternative purposes. So even the younger kids these days that are growing up, they are voicing that they don't want their images on Facebook and other platforms because it's embarrassing. If we think think about it, when we were younger, we didn't have those pictures out there. I know having smash cake, all kinds of stuff. You don't want those embarrassing pictures out there, but these kids these days are growing up with those embarrassing images of themselves out there. It's going to make it harder for them and business platforms and all kinds of other things with their images all over the place.
What is the recommended age for children to have a cell phone? What would y'all think?
I think I'm going to say, so it varies. I think that you look at like the activity level, right? So to an extent, that's why I do like something like Life 360, because at the age where you are allowing them to go and do without you, I think that there needs to be some way
device
to communicate without them having to rely on someone else, right?
Yes. And that's why there's the benefit, right?
Yeah, so that's the benefit
in that. Yeah.
So I think, maybe, I don't think I got to go to the mall until by myself or with a group of friends until I was like maybe 12 or 13. And I don't even think I was by myself. I just think my grandpa parked somewhere else. But I think, 12 or 13, but honestly, whatever point, and this has come up with teens a lot. And so like if teens are listening, hear me good. If your parent pays your phone bill, they get to check the phone whenever, right? So so this is different, right? So because in healthy relationships, when we're talking about healthy or unhealthy relationships, the checking of the phone and having a forfeit that inappropriate, but within the context of a parent-child relationship,
it's much different.
I think is much different. And I think that the moment that they have access to a phone, a tablet, social media, there needs to be oversight for appropriateness, not just for what your child is doing, but for what they're exposed to, right?
Correct.
Whether it be their friends or someone that they think is their age.
People that are posing as whatever.
12, 13, 14-year-olds and are totally not.
Yeah.
It's the idea that if we're extending this privilege, because it is very much so a privilege.
Right. That is earned.
Yep, it's earned.
Should be earned.
If we're extending this privilege to you, then I have ultimate oversight of it.
And I completely agree, but we don't always see that, right? Sometimes we see the parent who, here's your phone, have fun, and there is no oversight.
And there has to be oversight because there's so many things kids can get into, and they're unfortunately more advanced than us in the technology realm because they're learning every day faster than we are. So, having them next to you and seeing what they're touching, and so that you can get into what they're doing, so okay, what website did you actually visit, and what app are you hiding, because there's apps that do that, unfortunately.
Well, and there's even like code language out now, right?
Very much so.
You have to decode what they're saying, because one thing or an emoji may mean one thing to us, but the underworld, it means something totally different, right?
Absolutely.
And there's this decoding that parents have to decipher and be educated on, right?
Yes, and I think this is a time where it's really important. We know that the sphere of influence changes rapidly as kids age and such, and so you are competing with their friends and with social media and with whatever is going on in the culture at any given time. But I think that it's important that when you get this information, right, as much as you may want to blow a gasket, that you figure out a way how not to do that, so that you can have a conversation about, this is why this is problematic, right? Yep. This is what the consequences could be, or the implications
lay that out
could be, right? So let's not use it as a I got you type of thing, or just for punitive reasons, but to actually try to have some conversations around what's going on with you or in your world.
I call those mentoring moments.
Yes.
Let's have a mentoring moment.
Yes. And and don't get me wrong, I know I can only imagine, how hard it is, but very, very necessary, because there's a lot of things that can be perpetrated because kids feel like they cannot talk to their parents, and you don't want to miss it.
Yeah. I think if we teach our kids early, then they will grow up and make good decisions for their own lives and when they have children in their own families. So, Well, Jeronica and Maria, I really appreciate this discussion today. We're trying to raise awareness for all things domestic violence this month. So the discussion was amazing. Please stay tuned for future podcasts. We hope to bring you more topics of interest and things that are going on within our community and abroad, and to help military families, our civilians out here at Redstone Arsenal, and wherever you may be listening to this podcast. My name is Tim Rolfe. I'm the Family Advocacy Program Manager here at Redstone Arsenal, and we are signing off for today.